He laughed the loudest the night I lost everything. The rain had soaked through my jacket, my shoes squelched with every step, and I stood outside the coffee shop staring at him through the fogged-up window. He was warm inside, leaning back in his chair, that familiar grin stretched across his face, the grin that had once made me feel like I belonged somewhere. He didn't see me at first, or maybe he did and just didn't care. I'd walked there because I had nowhere else to go. I just closed the door on the apartment I could no longer afford. My savings account was empty, my car had been repossessed, and the world I'd spent years building had crumbled in what felt like seconds. When I finally pushed open the door to the cafe, the bell chimed softly like it was mocking me. "Hey," I said quietly. He turned, that smile still plastered on his face. It wasn't the kind of smile friends give when they're happy to see you. It was the kind they wear when they know they're winning. "Look who it is," he said, dragging out every syllable. The golden boy himself. His name was Marcus. We've been friends since we were kids. Or at least I thought we were friends. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same high school, dreamed about building something together. But somewhere along the way, friendship turned into competition. Quiet at first, then loud enough to break things. "You disappeared," he added. "Thought maybe you finally took that private jet you were always talking about." I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, the jet got repossessed, too." He leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee slowly. "So it's true then. You really lost everything." There was no sympathy in his voice, just satisfaction, like watching someone trip over their own shoes. But that's the thing about being underestimated. It's quiet. And quiet is where revolutions are born. I remember the first time something actually worked. It was 2:47 a.m. I was sitting on the floor of that same storage unit, laptop balanced on a crate, code lines glowing on the screen. I hit run, and the system didn't crash for the first time in weeks. I laughed. Not like Marcus. Not cruel. Mine was the kind of laugh that comes when a spark finally catches fire in the dark. A year later, that storage unit had turned into an office. 2 years later, that office had grown into a company. 3 years later, the same man who'd laughed in that coffee shop was watching my name flash across the financial news ticker, his face pale as the headlines called my startup one of the fastest growing companies in the sector. He didn't laugh then, because when you go from broke to powerful, the laughter turns into whispers. Whispers turn into invitations, and invitations turn into begging. The text came on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the city, the kind of view I used to imagine when I had nothing. Marcus's name lit up my phone for the first time in 3 years. "Hey man, long time. We should catch up." I stared at the message for a long time. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the kind of casual tone people use when they think they can walk back into your life like nothing ever happened. I didn't respond, but he didn't give up. A few days later, another message. "Heard about the funding round. Congrats. Really proud of you, bro." Bro. That word burned more than his laughter ever did. He had mocked me when I was broke. And now, standing on the outside of the empire I'd built, he wanted to slip back in through the side door like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I had changed. The first time I saw him again wasn't in a coffee shop this time. It was at a gala. Black tie, chandeliers, champagne. A fundraiser for tech innovation, the kind of event I used to dream about attending, not hosting. I didn't invite him, but he found his way there. I saw him before he saw me. Same grin, just sharper now, like someone who wanted to belong to a world he hadn't earned. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, holding a drink he probably couldn't afford. When his eyes finally met mine across the room, something flickered there. Not laughter, not victory, desperation. He froze for just half a second when he saw me. It was subtle, the kind of pause a man gives when the reality he built in his head doesn't match the one standing in front of him. His smile faltered, then returned, softer this time, almost practiced. Marcus had always been a master of pretending. He could fake charm like most people breathe. I didn't move. I just watched him make his way through the crowd, weaving between investors and CEOs, like a man who wanted to convince the world he belonged in that room. Maybe he thought this would be our cinematic reunion, the kind where I'd pat him on the back, forgive everything, and hand him a piece of the world I'd bled to build. "Daniel," he said when he finally reached me, that old forced warmth dripping from his voice. Man, look at you. I smiled, not out of joy but control. Marcus. He laughed lightly, like we were sharing some inside joke. I almost didn't recognize you. Mr. Big Shot now, huh? Fancy suits. Fancy parties. I didn't respond. My silence made him uncomfortable. It always had. Hey, listen, he said quickly, shifting his weight. About everything back then. I was just messing around. I didn't mean anything by it. I tilted my head. When you laughed while I was broke, the color in his face shifted. Come on, man. You know me. That's just how I joke. No, I said evenly. I know exactly how you are. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just stood there, surrounded by people who were waiting to shake my hand, but none waiting for him. He wasn't used to being the one on the outside looking in. His eyes flicked to the room around us. The polished suits, the waiters gliding past with crystal glasses, the cluster of reporters gathered near the stage. Then they came back to me, and something in his expression changed. The smirk melted into something more desperate. You did good, he said quietly. I mean, really good. I've been following the news. You're killing it, man. Honestly, I always knew you'd bounce back. I almost laughed. He knew. He didn't know anything. He'd written me off. Hell, he'd bury me the moment I fell. I didn't offer him a drink. I didn't ask how he'd been. I just let him stand there in the weight of everything he'd once mocked. Marcus, I said finally, what are you doing here? He blinked. Just thought I'd say hi. Congratulate you. Maybe catch up. Who invited you? His jaw clenched. Just a flicker, but I saw it. He hadn't been invited. He'd tag along with someone. A +1. A shadow at someone else's table. You've changed, he muttered. No, I said calmly. I just stopped expecting anything from people who only clap when you're winning. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since we were kids, Marcus didn't have a comeback. I walked away before he could find one. But that wasn't the end. Marcus was like a splinter, small enough to ignore for a while, but sharp enough to keep finding its way back. A week after the gala, the messages started again. I know things didn't end well between us, but I've got some ideas. Maybe we can work together. I'm serious, man. I've learned a lot. You could use someone who understands where you came from. Don't be like that. We were friends. Friends. The word rang hollow. Friends don't stand over your broken pieces and laugh. I didn't reply, but ignoring him wasn't enough for someone like Marcus. He'd always been addicted to proximity, to the warmth of power, even when it wasn't his. He started showing up at events, investor mixers, tech launches, even a charity dinner I'd hosted for underprivileged kids. Always as someone's guest, always hovering. And then came the meeting request. My assistant knocked on my office door one Monday morning, a puzzled look on her face. There's someone downstairs who says he knows you. Marcus something. I almost told her to send him away. But something in me, the part that remembered that coffee shop in the rain, said no. Send him up. When he walked in, it was like stepping into a mirror of everything we used to be. Except this time, he wasn't laughing. He was dressed too nicely for someone without a job that matched it. A suit slightly too big, shoes polished too hard. It wasn't confidence. It was costume. Nice place, he said, looking around my office. The skyline stretched behind me like a trophy he couldn't touch. I gestured to the chair. Why are you here, Marcus? He sat down slowly. I've been thinking a lot. I know I screwed up back then. But man, we've known each other our whole lives. We used to talk about building something big, remember? You and me, partners. Back when it was just ideas and cheap coffee. I stayed silent. He kept talking. I've got some concepts. Stuff I've been working on. It's not perfect, but with your resources, your connections, we could really make it happen. Just give me a shot. It wasn't about partnership. It was about access. He didn't want to build anything with me. He wanted to stand next to what I'd already built. Why now? I asked. He blinked. What? Why now, Marcus? Why not when I was sleeping on couches? Why not when I was cold calling investors who wouldn't give me 5 minutes? Why now, when it's convenient? He stared at me like he hadn't prepared for the question. I didn't think you want my help back then, he said weakly. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You didn't think I'd make it back then. Silence. And in that silence, something shifted. He realized what this was, not a conversation, but a reckoning. You laughed. I said quietly. You didn't just not help me. You mocked me. You made jokes about my failure to people who used to respect me. You enjoyed it. His mouth opened. I was just. No, I cut him off. You were exactly who you wanted to be. The desperation that had been simmering beneath his skin finally showed itself. Dan, I need this. I made mistakes, yeah, but I can fix things. Just give me a chance. Please. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who once watched me drown with a smirk was now reaching for a life raft I'd built without him. Marcus, I said slowly, I built everything you see around me from nothing. Alone. I owe that man I was back then more than I'll ever owe you. He swallowed hard. You can't mean that. I do. I stood. Not to intimidate him. Just to end it. You laughed when I was broke. Don't beg me now that I'm rich. His face tightened. Anger and shame danced across it in ugly waves. You think you're better than me now. No, I said. I just finally know who you are. He left without another word. But this time, I wasn't the one watching from the outside. A strange calm followed that meeting. Not triumph, not spite, just clarity. For years, I had imagined what I'd say to him if this day ever came. I thought I'd want to humiliate him the way he humiliated me. But when it finally happened, revenge didn't taste like victory. What did? Walking away. For the first time, I got to leave him in the rain. The days after that meeting felt different. Lighter. Not because Marcus had disappeared, he hadn't, but because I had finally let go of the weight of needing him to understand. For years, I'd quietly carried around this unspoken hunger for closure, like if I could just get him to admit what he'd done, it would heal something inside me. But I was wrong. Closure isn't about someone else's apology. It's about your own decision to stop bleeding. Marcus didn't fade into the background the way I hoped. He wasn't built to disappear quietly. I saw his name pop up at investor mixers, networking dinners, even on LinkedIn, trying to brand himself as some kind of early visionary who had believed in me before anyone else did. It was laughable, but the truth was the higher I climbed, the more people like him appeared. Marcus wasn't just one man, he was a type. The type who mocks your dreams when they're fragile and clings to them when they're gold. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw him again. I just wrapped up a meeting with my executive team when my assistant walked in with an expression that said, "You're not going to like this." "He's downstairs," she said softly. I didn't need to ask who. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied. I did. "He's insisting." I sighed. "Fine. Bring him to the conference room." 5 minutes. When I walked in, Marcus was pacing like a man rehearsing his lines. His suit was a little more wrinkled this time, his confidence worn thinner. "Dan," he said the second I stepped in. "Thank you for seeing me." I closed the door behind me. "You've got 5 minutes." He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto mine like a desperate salesman trying to make the pitch of his life. "I know I messed up before. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. But I've been working on something real this time. A startup idea. It's solid, I swear. I've got early projections, a deck, even a small team. All I need is capital, a push. And you're the only person I trust to give me that chance." There was again. That word, trust. It rolled off his tongue like it had meaning, but it was hollow. He didn't trust me. He needed me. And those two things aren't the same. I folded my arms. "Why me?" He hesitated. "Because you know me. You know where I come from. We've been through everything together. We built dreams side by side when we had nothing." I let out a slow breath. "We didn't build those dreams together, Marcus. I built mine while you laughed at them." He winced like I'd physically hit him. "I was young. Stupid. I didn't mean it." "You meant every second of it," I said calmly. "You loved being the one who laughed because it made you feel bigger when I was small." His eyes darted to the floor. "I'm not that guy anymore." "Maybe not," I said, "but I'm not the guy who needs your approval anymore either." His hands tightened around the file he was holding. "Just hear me out. Please." Against my better judgment, I did. I let him walk me through his pitch, a tech concept half-baked and full of holes. He didn't need an investor. He needed a savior. When he was done, I set the file on the table. "This isn't ready. Not even close. But you could help me fix it," he said quickly. "You've got the team, the resources. You can mentor me. We could build this together." "No," I said softly. His face went pale. "What?" "No, Marcus. I picked up the file and handed it back to him. I built everything I have by clawing my way through failure alone. No one saved me, least of all you. You don't get to skip the pain just because I didn't. His jaw tightened, that old bitterness surfacing. So that's it? You're just going to let me drown? I almost laughed. Drown. The word was poetic, because when I was the one gasping for air, Marcus wasn't tossing me a rope. He was watching with popcorn in hand. You're not drowning, I said evenly. You're just learning what it feels like when someone doesn't hand you the world. His eyes flashed. You've changed. I've grown, I corrected. Big difference. He stared at me for a long moment. The silence between us felt like an echo of every choice that had led us here. Every moment he'd chosen pride over loyalty, mockery over support. Fine, he said finally, his voice hardening. You're rich now. Untouchable. Congrats. But remember something, Dan, nobody stays on top forever. I tilted my head slightly. I know. That's why I built my foundation alone. So when people like you try to shake it, it doesn't move. He stormed out without another word. After he left, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was something I hadn't expected, clarity. For so long, Marcus had existed in my head as this shadow from my past. The night he laughed at me in that cafe had burned itself into my memory like a scar. I used to think proving him wrong would fix something inside me. But standing there in my own conference room, watching him storm out, I realized something. Proving him wrong wasn't the point. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him at all. He'd laughed when I was broke. But when he begged me after I got rich, the real victory wasn't in rejecting him. It was in realizing I didn't need to prove anything anymore. It wasn't long before his bitterness turned to desperation. The following weeks were a slow unraveling. I'd hear whispers, him showing up at investor meetings claiming to be my longtime partner, reaching out to journalists with embellished stories, trying to ride the wave he'd once mocked. But the thing about building your empire brick by brick is that no one can fake having laid those foundations. People talked. They always do. But my reputation was forged in the fire he left me in. This was built on shadows, and shadows collapse in the light. Then came the night of the awards gala. A grand ballroom, chandeliers dripping in gold light, cameras flashing at every entrance. My company had just closed one of the biggest deals of the year, and the invitation list read like a roll call of power. I wasn't just attending this event. I was one of the faces of it. And Marcus found a way in. Again, I saw him near the bar, clutching a drink too tightly, pretending he belonged. But the eyes around him told a different story. He wasn't part of this world. He was orbiting it, trying to find a crack to slip through. As I stepped onto the stage to accept the award, I caught his gaze in the crowd. For the first time, there was no smirk, no arrogance. Just the look of a man who finally realized the joke had never been on me. It had always been on him. The applause that night was thunderous, a sound that used to feel like a dream and now felt like a quiet nod from the universe. My name echoed through the ballroom, lights catching on the glass award in my hand. I smiled into the crowd, not because I needed their approval, but because I'd built every brick of that moment myself. But Marcus's eyes in the crowd told a different story. His face was pale, jaw tight, hands still gripping his drink like it might anchor him to the room. He had always believed that if I succeeded, it would somehow be temporary, that I'd stumble, that I'd fall again. But now, watching me on that stage, he saw the truth. This wasn't a lucky break. This was permanence. I gave my speech simply. No poetic metaphors, no name drops, no grand gestures. Just the truth. I started this journey with nothing. I said into the mic, and I mean nothing. I've slept on floors. I've had doors slammed in my face. I've been laughed at more times than I can count. But what kept me going wasn't the dream of proving people wrong. It was the promise I made to myself that their laughter would never define me. Only I could do that. The room was silent. Not in the awkward way, in the listening way. And to anyone in this room who's ever been counted out, dismissed, or mocked when they were at their lowest, remember this. You don't need their approval to rise. You only need your own permission to keep going. A wave of applause followed. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, Marcus took a step toward the exit. I didn't expect to see him again that night. But life, in its strange rhythm, isn't always about what you plan. It was past midnight when the ballroom finally emptied. I'd done the handshakes, the photo ops, the congratulations. The afterglow of success hung in the air like the last notes of a song. I walked out through the side entrance, craving silence. And there he was. Marcus was sitting on the low stone steps outside, jacket half off, tie loosened, staring at the pavement like it held the answers to his failures. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could have kept walking. A year ago, maybe I would have. "You're really good at speeches," he said finally, his voice rougher than I remembered. "You always were." I didn't respond. I just stood there, the cold air filling the space between us. He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "You know what's funny? When you were broke, I told people you were all talk, that you'd never make it. I convinced myself that your dream was just smoke. That way, when it burned out, I wouldn't have to face the fact that you were better than me." His words weren't an apology. Not yet. But there were cracks in a wall I'd never seen him lower. "You know why I laughed that night?" he continued. "Because I was jealous. Jealous that even when you lost everything, you still had that look in your eyes. Like you'd get it all back. I hated you for that." I leaned against the railing, crossing my arms. "You could have built something, too." "I tried," he said, a short, bitter exhale. "But I never wanted to build. I just wanted to have. And when you have nothing inside of you, all you can do is laugh at people who do." For the first time in years, Marcus sounded honest. Not scheming, not performing, just honest. "You ever think about that night?" I asked quietly. "Every damn day," he said. "It's the night I realized I wasn't the hero of my story. I was the fool sitting on the sidelines laughing at someone who was actually brave enough to try." I didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to prove. The thing about betrayal is, it doesn't always come wrapped in knives. Sometimes it comes in laughter, in silence, in the way someone watches you fall without blinking. But the thing about forgiveness is, it isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting the weight of them go. "Dan," Marcus said, looking up at me with tired eyes, "I don't expect anything from you. Not money, not help, not even forgiveness. I just needed you to know, I know what I did. I know who I was." I nodded slowly. And, and I hate that guy," he said quietly. "But I don't want to be him anymore." It would have been easy to throw his words back in his face, to remind him how I felt in that cafe, cold and broke, while his laughter echoed like a verdict. But the truth was, I didn't need to. The past had already done the job. "You don't owe me anything," I said. His brows furrowed, confused. "What?" "You don't owe me an apology. I don't owe you forgiveness. Life already settled the score, Marcus. I built mine. You're still trying to build yours." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see it, the shame, the regret, the flicker of something that looked a lot like understanding. "Do you hate me?" he asked finally. I shook my head. "No, I stopped giving you that power a long time ago." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in his chest for years. We sat there for a while, not as friends, not as enemies. Just two men with the same history, but very different futures. The cold air wrapped around us, and for once, neither of us tried to fill the silence. When he finally stood, he straightened his jacket clumsily. "I'll figure it out," he said. "This time for real." "Good," I replied. He hesitated for a second, as if he wanted to say more, but instead just nodded and walked away down the empty street. No begging, no deals, just a man finally facing the weight of his choices. The thing no one tells you about winning is that it isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet after someone walks away, and you realize their laughter no longer echoes inside you. I watched him disappear around the corner, and I didn't feel anger, or triumph, or vindication. I just felt free. That night, as the city lights flickered against the wet pavement, I understood something deeply. The people who mock you when you're down will always return when you rise. Not because they love you, but because they recognize strength. And when they do, the real power isn't in slamming the door. It's in knowing you don't need to open it. I walked back to my car, the award still tucked under my arm. My reflection in the window looked different. Not because of the success, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying Marcus's ghost. When people had laughed at me back then, I thought revenge would be the sweetest victory. But it turned out the sweetest victory was indifference. I didn't need Marcus to beg. I didn't need to crush him. I just needed to live a life so solid that his laughter could never touch it again. The weeks after that night unfolded quietly, almost too quietly. For years, Marcus had been a ghost that lingered in my story whether I invited him or not. His laughter from that night in the cafe used to replay in my mind like a broken record. But now, every time I thought of it, the sound didn't sting anymore. It didn't echo. It just faded. It's strange how silence can be louder than noise when you've lived with a wound for so long. I went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. The company was expanding fast, new hires, new offices, bigger investors. The version of me that Marcus laughed at didn't exist anymore. That man had been forged in failure and fire, but he'd walked out of the ashes and built something unshakable. But the world has a way of testing your peace. It doesn't always come as enemies kicking down your door. Sometimes it comes as whispers. Did you hear Marcus is trying to launch his own company? One of my senior managers asked me during a strategy meeting. He's been reaching out to some of our angel investors. I leaned back in my chair, expression calm. I'd expected this. Marcus was too proud to disappear quietly. Let him, I said simply. My team exchanged curious glances. They were used to seeing me strategize, outmaneuver control. But this wasn't a chess match anymore. I didn't need to play. He's trying to use your name, another executive added, telling people you're advising him. I gave a small, humorless smile. People who know me will know better. People who don't matter. That was the difference between now and the man I used to be. The old me would have reacted, tried to control the narrative, maybe even confronted him. The new me understood something far more powerful. You don't fight shadows by chasing them. You let the light do its work. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a notification that made me pause. A headline: Local entrepreneur accused of misrepresenting investor ties. The photo was of Marcus. I clicked the article. He'd tried to pitch his startup idea to a group of investors, leveraging my name and reputation to make it sound legitimate. It backfired. Someone checked. Someone talked. The investors pulled out, and his shaky foundation crumbled before it even began. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not smiling, not gloating, just still. This was how it always goes with people like him. They build castles out of smoke, expecting the world to never blow. The next time I saw him was not at a gala or a conference. It was at a small coffee shop in the corner of the city, the same one where he'd once laughed at me when I had nothing. I hadn't planned to see him. I just stopped by to grab a coffee on my way to a meeting. And there he was, sitting alone by the window, not dressed like a man chasing dreams anymore, but like a man who'd run out of places to be. He looked smaller, not physically, but in the way someone does when their armor has cracked. For a moment, I considered walking away. But something in me said no, not out of pity, but because the story deserved its final chapter. He looked up when I approached, and I saw a recognition flash across his tired face. No smirk, no grin, just quiet. "Dan," he said softly. I pulled out the chair across from him, the same one I'd once sunk into years ago with soaked clothes and nothing left in my pocket. Except this time, I wasn't the broken one. "You've got some nerve," he muttered, almost to himself. "I thought you'd at least enjoy watching me fall." I stirred the sugar in my coffee slowly. "I don't celebrate people falling, Marcus. Not even you." He laughed bitterly. "You should. God knows I did when it was your turn." "I know." Silence stretched between us. Not the kind that suffocates. The kind that settles everything that's already been said. He finally leaned back, letting out a tired sigh. "They pulled out. The investors. Everyone. No one trusts me now. One headline and it's over." "That's how it works," I said calmly. "Reputation is borrowed until you earn it. You tried to borrow mine." His eyes dropped. "I didn't think it would blow up like this. I just wanted a shortcut. I thought if I could just stand next to you again, I'd get what you have." I nodded slowly. "That's the problem, Marcus. You were always standing next to me. Never with me." For years, I used to picture what this moment would feel like, the day when the tables turned. I imagined victory would feel like a roar. like fireworks. But standing there, watching him unravel in the same coffee shop where I'd once broken down, it didn't feel like victory at all. It felt like release. You were right, he said quietly, staring out the window. Nobody likes the guy who laughs when people are down. They remember. Investors remember. People talk. I burned every bridge I ever had. I didn't say anything. Some lessons aren't meant to be softened. I used to think you were lucky, he added. But now I see it wasn't luck. It was work. It was pain. I wasn't willing to bleed for it the way you did. I met his eyes. You don't get to skip the struggle, Marcus. Nobody does. His fingers tapped nervously against the table. Do you hate me? No, I said honestly. I just don't need you anymore. The words didn't come out cruel. They came out clean. Final. He didn't beg that day. He didn't plead. He just nodded slowly, like a man who finally understood the price of the choices he made. And as I stood to leave, he said something I hadn't expected. I was wrong about you. I paused, my hand on the chair. I know. When I walked out of that coffee shop this time, the rain wasn't soaking me. My clothes weren't heavy with failure. My hands weren't empty. This time, it was Marcus who sat on the inside, watching me walk away. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The city sprawled beneath me like a constellation of everything I'd earned. The air was cold, crisp, the kind that clears your head. And for the first time, I realized something simple but powerful. Success isn't about proving the people who laughed at you wrong. It's about building a life so solid, so unshakable, that their laughter no longer matters. When they laughed, I built. When they doubted, I worked. When they disappeared, I kept going. And that's why I stood where I did, while Marcus sat in the same place I once did. The difference wasn't luck. It was choices. Night air was colder than usual, the kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of softening them. I stood on my balcony with a glass of water in my hand, looking at the city that once felt too big for me. It glittered like a constellation of second chances. And beneath all the lights, somewhere in a small corner of the city, Marcus was probably sitting in silence, replaying his choices. While I was at the bottom, the world had turned its back on me. But the cruel truth was, it wasn't the world that broke me. It was the people I thought would hold me up. Marcus wasn't the only one who had laughed back then. He was just the loudest. But here I was standing tall. Not because the world suddenly got kinder, but because I had learned how to stand on my own legs. I leaned on the railing and remembered something my father used to say. One day, they'll either clap for you or choke on their laughter. Just make sure you're too busy building to care which one it is. He was right. 2 months passed after that day at the cafe. 2 months of silence. Marcus didn't show up again. No more texts. No more calls. No attempts to cling to my shadow. The whispers about his failed startup faded quickly. That's the thing about the world. It forgets people who never truly built something of their own. But in that quiet, something changed in me too. For years, my hunger for success was fueled by anger, by the sound of Marcus's laughter echoing in my head. I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted him to choke on the sight of my name in headlines. I wanted revenge dressed as achievement. And I got it. All of it. But once I had it, the fire didn't feel the same. I realized that building despite someone is like drinking salt water. It pushes you forward, but it never satisfies you. Real peace isn't in proving them wrong. It's in no longer needing to prove anything at all. I was at a leadership summit one evening when I heard his name again. Not in a headline this time. In a whisper. 2 investors behind me were talking over drinks. Yeah, Marcus. He's trying to rebuild. Smaller now. Something modest. Heard he's actually working this time instead of name dropping. Guess he finally got the memo. I didn't turn around. I didn't interrupt. I didn't feel the usual sharp twist in my chest when his name came up. Instead, there was something else. Something unexpected. Pride? No, not pride. Closure. For the first time, Marcus's name didn't drag me backward. It didn't tether me to that rainy night in the cafe. It just passed through me like a breeze through an open window. People change. Some slowly, some only when the ground beneath them collapses. A few days later, I got a message. Not a long one. Just 5 words. Thank you for everything, Dan. No context. No explanation. No follow-up. And I didn't need one. I didn't reply. Not out of pettiness, but because there was nothing more to say. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with quiet understanding. Meanwhile, my own life kept growing faster than I could keep up. New acquisitions, a foundation I'd started to mentor young founders, a board seat at a company I used to dream of working for. Every time someone asked me, "What made you keep going back then?" I thought a single moment. That night in the cafe, sitting across from Marcus, when his laughter hit me harder than the cold outside. That was the moment I broke. But it was also the moment I began. Every empire starts with one decision. That night, mine was simple. I'll rise so high their laughter will echo up, but never reach me again. It wasn't just Marcus who had returned once I succeeded. It was the old classmates who ignored my messages, the relatives who called me reckless for chasing my dream, the investors who once said, "You're not ready." They all came back wearing the same mask, friendly smiles and sweet words that didn't match the silence they gave me when I was down. And one by one, I learned to smile back, not with bitterness, but with power. Because when you build something solid, you don't need revenge. Their regret does the talking for you. One evening, I found myself back near that cafe. Not because I planned it. It was just on my route. The rain was falling lightly, soft and rhythmic against the pavement. I stopped across the street and looked through the fogged-up window. The same table where I once sat. The same worn-out chairs. But everything else was different. I was no longer the man who needed Marcus's approval. Or anyone's. I was the man who had built his life while they laughed. I stepped inside, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window alone. No fear. No pain. Just quiet strength. I could almost hear his voice in my memory. That mocking tone. That smug laugh. But instead of anger, I felt gratitude. Because that laugh didn't break me. It built me. A young barista placed a cup on my table. She looked at me curiously, probably recognizing me from some business feature or article. "Sorry," she said shyly, "but aren't you Daniel Rhodes?" I nodded, smiling faintly. "My brother follows your work," she said. "He talks about how you built your company from nothing. How you didn't give up. He, he wants to start something of his own. Tell him," I said softly, "the world will laugh first. But one day they'll clap." She smiled, not fully understanding but enough. As she walked away, I stared at the steam rising from my cup and thought about how far I'd come. Marcus had laughed. So had many others. But in the end, their laughter didn't write my story. I did. The call came a week later. Not for Marcus, but about him. A mutual acquaintance reached out to tell me he'd started working with a small local nonprofit, helping rebuild a tech literacy program for underprivileged youth. He wasn't chasing big investors. He wasn't name-dropping. He was just doing the work. For a long time, I didn't know how to feel about that. A part of me wanted to dismiss it. Another part of me, the part that remembered being at the bottom, felt something else. Maybe redemption doesn't always need an audience. Late that night, I looked out over the city again. My reflection in the glass was sharper now, not because of the suit or the success, but because I finally understood something I should have known all along. When someone laughs at your pain, it's not a prediction. It's a mirror. Marcus's laugh was never about my failure. It was about his fear that I'd succeed without him. And I did. I'd built my empire brick by brick, rain-soaked and sleepless, while they watched from a distance. And when I rose, they came back, not because they cared, but because they had to look up. The night of the final board meeting of the year, I stood at the top floor of my office, lights dimmed, city wide awake beneath me. This view never got old, not because of the buildings or the glow, but because I remembered exactly how it felt to have nothing, to be on the other side of the glass, looking up, wondering if I'd ever make it. Marcus's laugh used to live in my head rent-free. But now, it was just a distant sound, like the echo of an old radio station fading out as you drive too far away. And the further I went, the fainter it got. It was funny in a quiet kind of way. He had laughed when I was broke. He had stood over my failure like it was proof that he'd made the right choices. But what he didn't realize then, what none of them realized, was that their laughter wasn't a wall. It was fuel, and I used every drop of it. I never sought revenge. Not really. But the world has a way of delivering its own justice. The ones who mock you in the dark often end up clapping when the lights come on, whether they want or not. And Marcus? He didn't clap. He bowed his head, not because I crushed him, but because life showed him the truth that no amount of arrogance can drown out. You don't get to laugh at someone's beginning and then demand a seat in their ending. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a youth entrepreneurship program. The audience wasn't made of billionaires or power brokers. It was made of kids, some still in school uniforms, some wearing worn-out hoodies, all with eyes that carried the same fire mine once had. I stood at the podium, took a breath, and began. When I started, I said, nobody believed in me. In fact, some people laughed. They told me I was reaching too high, dreaming too big. They said the world doesn't care about people like us. And maybe they were right at first. But here's the thing. I paused, scanning their faces. The world doesn't decide who wins. You do. Every time they laugh, they give you a choice. You can let it break you, or you can let it build you. The room was quiet. A few nodded slowly, understanding more than words could explain. You'll remember the laughs, I continued. Trust me, you will. They'll sting. But one day, those same laughs will be nothing more than proof that you had the courage to try when they didn't. And when they come back, and they will, you won't need revenge. You'll just smile because you'll finally know what they never did. After the talk, a boy no older than 16 came up to me. His hands were trembling around a notebook filled with sketches and scribbled plans. They call me stupid at school, he blurted out, for thinking I can build something, for dreaming too big. I put a hand on his shoulder and looked him straight in the eye. Good, I said softly. Let them laugh. One day, they'll remember they laughed. You won't need to remind them. The boy smiled, not wide but steady, the way I had once smiled at myself after hitting my first small win. That was the real power, not the suits, not the offices, not the money. The power was turning pain into foundation. On my way home that night, I passed by the same street where everything had started. The rain was coming down, just like that night years ago. I stopped across the cafe. The lights inside glowed warm against the storm. I didn't need to go in this time. I didn't need a confrontation. That chapter had already been written. Marcus and I had both been changed by that night in different ways. I had chosen to build. He had chosen to laugh. And life had simply followed those choices to their natural end. I whispered into the night, barely audible over the rain, thank you. Not to him, to the pain, to the laughter, to the fire it lit in me. Success doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the sound of your own footsteps walking past the place that once broke you. Not with bitterness, but with peace. And that was the truest victory of all.